And welcome back to the Book and Life podcast. Today, as I was telling you, we are going to have a absolutely fantastic author. In fact, I know she's the next dame that we will be seeing coming out of England. She is funny. She's got some of the most down-to-earth books that I've read in a long time. And I think she's a great believer in realism, so I can't wait to discuss that with her. But before we get into that and you find out who this extraordinary guest is, I'm going to quickly read our usual advert, which is called The Shadow, which is book 4 of the Time Guardian series by Marianne Curley, our beautiful Australian children's author. The battle is over, the war is won, the prophecy complete, but life can't just pick up where it left off for Ethan. Struggling to cope with tragic loss, at odds with friends in the guard, he finds himself adrift, jumping at shadows, and sensing someone who can't possibly be there. Blaming herself for the goddess Lithela's death, Giselle swears revenge, and vilify the immortals' plan for world domination, but Giselle hadn't planned on love. And that leaves her with an unbearable choice. Should she follow her heart, or the strings of a goddess short on praise but high on expectation, who continues to pull her from the grave? As the guard and the order battle through the past and into an impossible future, darkness lurks around every corner. The fight for the world's survival rests with just one. Is it friend, or is it foe? Who stands in the shadow? And just a reminder that The Price of Freedom by Rosemary Cowie she's donating all of her royalties to the Ukraine Refugee Fund to help support the refugees from Ukraine with this ongoing devastating war. And so is actually her agent too. So make sure that you stop by and check out her Roman crime British series and support the Ukrainians where you can. Now let's go on to something fun. I've been looking forward to this all week. I've been driving my husband crazy with it. Let's welcome the beautiful, the gorgeous Nancy Revell.
Well, that is some introduction, isn't it? That's lovely. Thank you.
Yeah, I funnily enough learned my introduction techniques and tricks from wrestlers. So I used to have to do sort of in meetings, I would have to build up storylines and introductions and stuff. And one of the things that they taught me was how to do an introduction. And of course, thinking back to old friends, they said, you better do good introductions on your show. And I'm like, okay, fine. I'll try. I'm not a professional ringing instructor, but I'll do my best. So I always give it a good go. Some of my guests like it. Other guests find it uncomfortable, so I'm glad that you enjoyed it, because I get some weird faces when I do it, because obviously usually you can see each other. Our audience can, because we're doing this audio. But yeah, it's super funny, because everyone's like, how do you do that? Well, there's your answer. It's my time with the wrestlers.
Yes.
Yeah.
Very, very good.
So I have to say, I loved your book. Because I've been sticking it out on Instagram that I've sort of been looking at it, reading it. And funnily enough, I discovered you because I was looking for my next Catherine Cookson author. And I had tried Dilly Court, and I think she's an amazing writer, but it didn't seem realistic enough for me. I didn't feel that connection with everyday people quite the same as I did with Catherine. And then I tried a couple others, and I still felt like we were missing the point of it. With stories about everyday people that were telling everyday stories. Then I found you, and I was like, hallelujah! I found someone that can replace my longing for Catherine. And also, I will manage to not walk around with a very Cockney accent. Because for whatever reason, after I read Catherine Cookson's, I have to prevent myself from going into this very heavy English Cockney Liverpoolian accent, which I believe I picked up from my best friend, Debs. but it
Oh,
is awful because I can't resist.
oh.
So yeah, I love it, and I love the way that you did just the whole shipyard idea with the girls, and you can actually see genuine struggle and survival. And I love how you've done that as a series as well, almost like you're pulling this struggle these girls through the whole way.
Mm. Yes, I think that's interesting, and it's lovely to hear your sort of feedback on it as well, because um, that was something that was very important to me, was to have that realism in it. It was very important that I reflected that time as best as I possibly could. That could be because of my journalistic background.
Ah, okay.
Because that was always, something, sort of, you learn, it's a skill as a journalist. And that's possibly why I did an awful lot of research, because I thought, if I'm going to write fiction that is set very much in a time that was true and historical,
Yeah.
and about, real shipyards in a real war,
Hmm.
then I had to do it as realistically as possible. It felt really important for me to do that. So
Yeah.
that meant I did lots of research.
And I think you really pull that through, because I grew up with both my grandfathers served, and they served totally different ways as family. But I had one who was an electrician, and he would run around on this little army bike. Um, and bless him, he was a survivor of polio, so he had one leg shorter than the other. But that was his way of serving, was he did stuff with the electrics. He built bridges. He basically told them how to blow up bridges, and he had this whole other way of looking at things. And then my other grandfather was merchant navy/navy, and he would actually go out and recover these people from the ocean. He would get people out of sunken ships and submarines. That was his job. And
Um,
that time frame, because I kind of grew up with them complaining and comparing everything to the war, which I thought was hilarious because they were quite young when all this was going on. I always found it I got drawn into history because of that. And my history is not the best. I did it at school and I was awful at it, but I still loved it because I was growing up with Catherine. And my mom didn't actually want me reading Catherine, but I was reading Catherine Cookson, which, by the way, does not help your dyslexia. So don't think that's a good idea. I discovered it made me a little bit worse. But reading her, it was really good because I was able to find somebody to inspire me a little bit, because she's dyslexic. I'm dyslexic. I had a school that didn't understand what dyslexia was, and they were trying to support me, but they didn't know how to support me. So it was really good, and it really built that strong sense of, if she can do it, so can I. And I'm a very
yeah,
driven person, and so anytime I get to have sort of fictional books, but they're set in a time period with everyday people, I absolutely adore it. And I think you know as well as I do that Catherine wrote hundreds of books. I haven't quite
mm,
got them. I don't think I have them all yet, because I keep coming across ones and I'm like, wait, do I have that one? And then I run to the bookcase and I quickly check and I'm like, damn it, I don't have that one. So my husband kind of gets annoyed at me. He's like, what book have you ordered this week? But yeah, I mean, I just love her, and I'm so
yeah.
sad that she's actually disappearing now
She
from view.
is, yeah,
I
she
think
is,
because
isn't she? Yeah.
she sold so well to sort of the more senior, what we would class nowadays is the senior generation, that the
Yeah,
younger generation have no idea about her. So and essentially with this podcast, I'm keeping her going and taking the
yeah,
Catherine
good,
Cookson
good,
banner, and I'm
good.
flying it high and saying, hey, and I'm introducing her to a lot of American historical romance writers to try and sort of say, hey, you can do historical fiction and it can be romantic, but you don't need to make it, I don't want to say
Yeah,
sugarcoat the entire historical period, but I guess that is
yeah,
what it is in some respects. A lot of them do that. And I'm trying to explain
yes,
you
I
can have
agree.
that great romantic story, but you don't have to cut out
Yes,
struggle and tragedy, because that was our everyday life. You know what I mean?
yeah, yes, definitely. And I think that's the whole thing with history and historical fiction. is, especially if you've not lived through it yourself,
Yeah.
is perhaps to sugarcoat it a little bit. And I was lucky in the fact that, first of all, I set it in my hometown of Sunderland. So
Yeah.
I was brought up there, so I knew it. I had been brought up similar to what you've been saying, with references to the
Yeah.
war, and family members that had been through the war. So I think that helped me keep the realism and not to sugarcoat it. And I think that enabled me to write about that period. I'm just thinking, if I'd been asked to write about, say, the turn of the century, that's never really appealed to me, probably because I would feel that was quite a
Yeah.
stretch. It helped me being able to speak to people who had been through the
Yeah.
war, whereas I wouldn't have otherwise. Yeah, so yes, it's a very interesting one, but I have found the same as you, that sometimes it's a little bit sugar
Yeah.
coated. But I am a great one for realism. And when I read books myself, it does have to feel very real, even if it's a mad
Yes.
plot,
Oh, there's
you know.
so many of those, isn't there? But it's funny you mentioned that, because actually after you, I discovered Elizabeth Chatwick and Jean Plane, who are very much, they keep the tragedy in there, they keep the struggle in there, but they get the most important element, which I think historical readers like ourselves love, which is the hope. The hope and the family
Yes.
and the community and the connections that everyone had. And yes, all these people might have been struggling, but they had family. They had that strong, they had huge families. So they had a lot of people that were helping each
Yeah.
other and really forcing each other through things. And to me, it was almost like I find them right after, and I'm like, I'm going to hold on to them, and I'm going to suggest them to Nancy when I get her on, and say, "Hey, Nancy, you tried these?
Yeah. Yeah, no,
They're
I
our
will. I
kind of
always,
stuff." But I also think what made
yeah.
Catherine work so well is she did live through that time period where she was a
Yes.
servant, and she grew up in a servant home, and she saw firsthand. I mean, since
Yes.
she was really young. She was what, 8 or something when she started working, and if not younger
Yes.
than that. So she had
Yeah.
that long, sort of drawn out
Mm.
battle of seeing racism,
Yes.
inequality, and sort of the violence against women, which we're now seeing all these movements for. But she was really tackling them
Mm.
way back in the sort of 80s and early
Yeah.
90s, when those sort of
Mm.
things were not being discussed at all, really.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I found her autobiography fascinating. I really enjoyed reading that, about her
Yeah,
life. And funnily enough, I read that as I was sort of preparing and starting to write the first book in the
yeah,
series, and that gelled a lot with what I knew about my own parents'
yeah,
background, being brought up in Sunderland. They were very sort of poor, working class, and my mum's family all worked in the
yeah,
shipyards. So it was, and the image I the feeling that I got from my mum was a very unsugar coated image. Let's
yep,
put it that way. It was hard. She was from a very big family. Her father died when a metal plate fell
yeah,
on him, and she was only 14 at the time. And her grandfather died in the same way. So there was, and I tried to feed that kind of feel into the book as
mm,
well, to show that there was this level of danger, and it was kind of
yeah.
accepted. It wasn't a big hoo-ha. Oh, it's really dangerous. It was kind of just accepted. That was part and parcel of the
Mm-hmm.
job. Lots of slicing off of the fingers, and injuries and
Burning
deaths.
themselves, yes,
Um,
yes.
yeah, and all of that kind of thing. So although I didn't want to sort of make the novels too dark, I did want to sort of make reference to them, so people knew that this was also happening in the
Yeah, and you
background.
did such a good
Because
job of it. I mean, because when I was starting to put together what ended up being called the Shetland Royals back then, and it was to do with the bus movement. We had a secret mission that was run out of Shetland where spies were taken and dropped in sort of Finland and Norway and Denmark. But it wasn't just that. These are everyday guys, families, sons, teenagers, who were taking their fishing boats out and were sailing across the sea to save refugees. And not just refugees were they pulling out, but they were pulling people out of sort of ships that had been blown up or submarines that had been blown up. And these were people that were survived in the sea. And if they didn't pull them out, they weren't going to. And they would take them back to the islands and they would get them sort of reacclimated or help them, get to Canada or the States or get into the rest of the UK to try and give them a chance. Because 90% of the ones that they rescued, I think there was only like maybe one or two that they kept in a camp because they were diehard German, army. But everybody else didn't want to be there. Didn't want anything to do with the war, was forced in, they were trying to save their families, or, whatever the situation was. So that was what they did, and they gave up their lives to do that. But not just their lives, they gave up their boats. The women then had to step up, and they would have to row out into safer waters and hope that there was fish there that they could catch and bring back in and feed the community.
Yes.
And, some of them took over the farms because there was great farmland there in Shetland, and they were dealing with sheep and they were dealing with cattle and they were growing, because Shetland was very self-sustaining back then. So they were, they sort of divided all this stuff among the community. And Shetland almost continued on. And it wasn't as impacted as much as the war, as a lot of places was with the war, but Shetland did lose a lot of men because the men signed up very quickly to go fight. A lot of them signed up very quickly to go either into the Navy or into the Merchant Navy, because even if they got rejected from the Navy, they always had the Merchant Navy to go into. So they were, most of the men were gone all the time, and women really had to sort of pull their bootstraps up and say, okay. And young girls, who were 10, were dragged out of school and said, right, you're going to sit and gullet fish, or, on the pier, or you're going to help cut the peat and dry them. Whatever was needed, they were using these sort of young girls to try and sort of I would say, bridge the gap. And I thought, I took all these stories that I had from people from care homes and from my grandparents and from their friends, because I was one of these writers before I knew I was a writer, so I was pulling all these stories out of these old people that would visit my grandparents and get as much of the stuff that I could get out of them so that I could one day write these stories, not knowing that I would actually be a writer, but I liked that idea. And I was pulling all this stuff out, and I thought, well, how do I package all these stories into one place? And I came up with the idea of Shetland actually had royals. We actually had a royal earl who, the Earl thing for Shetland no longer exists, but back then it did. So I thought, right, okay, the Earl and his wife, I've got these 3 overly sort of fiery, extreme daughters who are going to want to go and do all this stuff, and their mum's going to want to keep them, continue that kind of, no, we're ladies, and you've got to marry the right man, and you've got to be thinking about your embroidery, not what, farm work you can be doing, or what fishing you could be doing, or, all these different ideas. And then for the man, the Earl himself I kind of put him in charge of the bus project and had him running it. And it was so weird, because when I was sitting talking to Celia Reese, who I've had on several weeks before you, she was like, oh my gosh, this is really good, I want to read it when you're finished it. And I'm like, that way now that I've kind of tied myself into a corner, I'm like, I don't want to finish it because I don't want to share it. But I get where you're kind of used your journalism techniques, and I kind of did the same idea. I wanted to use what Catherine had used herself, conversations with people who'd actually been through those times, who'd actually grown in that environment, and who'd suffered and had to fight through those extreme times. I don't know if I'm going to ever pull it off quite as well as Catherine, but I'm going to give it a go. because I believe a lot of Shetlanders would
God,
love
you've
to
got
see
to,
that
yes.
story sort of done and out there in a
Yes. Yeah.
fictional sort of base, but
Yes.
with,
Yes.
true elements throughout the
Yeah.
whole thing. And that's my goal. And I think kind of I had lost all hope of doing that until I found your book, and I was like, okay, people still want to read this stuff.
Yeah.
So maybe it is worth going for.
Yes, they
Yeah.
do. Yeah. No, it is actually, just as you were talking, I was thinking, gosh, that's such a unique,
Yes.
idea. I'm telling you, I'm sure the publishers would be very interested in seeing a sample, because they're crying out for that. There's a big surge in
I've not
SARC
had that kind of
lately.
experience or luck
Um,
yet, so I
you
actually
haven't
haven't
had
had
one,
that
sorry.
luck yet or response yet. Um, Maybe I'm just not speaking to the right ones, but everybody's more looking for the romanticized sort of historical dramas, and I think that's partly to do with Bridgerton's rise and all this sort of stuff. That I've
Mm,
really not had that open door of more realistic historical romance drama. I very much find closed doors and people maybe not as interested in it, which has made me hesitant to
mm,
kind of continue on writing it, because I'm thinking I might write this amazing story and maybe like two people read it in a manuscript form because, no publisher's going to want to touch this. Um, I actually got a reply from somebody, not to do with this story, but to do with a different story. It was my Viking story that said, it's not romantic enough. And that was really conquering the
mm,
story of Vikings, the last bloodline of the Viking royalty on the run and being hidden by other royal families in Europe. And I really did,
mm,
I kept
mm,
it in plain English so that it was easy to understand and read, because there's nobody that's going to be able to
mm.
read Old Norse, not in this day and age. So I focused really on that,
Yeah.
and so many publishers was just not interested in it. And again, I had pulled on
Mm,
local history and texts and stories from sort of Templars and Knights Templars and people that know this stuff inwards and outwards, and the factual stuff to create
mm.
that sort of story. And again, yeah, no, I really didn't have a very warm welcome at all, and it's left me curious. It has left me
That's
very curious.
surprising.
Yeah.
I mean, I always say to people who, are trying to get published is, get an agent
Yeah.
that really gets you and it has confidence in you and
Yes.
that you like, because they have the ear of the
Yeah.
publishers. So I think that's where I would be looking
I think
initially
that's what I
at,
will do. I
because
think I'll go back
there's,
to that. And I don't
yeah,
think anyone does it better than us British people for true historical dramas. Because
yeah,
I don't think
it's interesting. Yeah.
many British people really believe in sugarcoating it anymore. But I think we have this unique way of
Yeah.
we've grown up with history around us our entire lives. And I think it just gets into our sort of pores and
Mm,
into who we are. And then we're like, we really want to write it. I think as writers, we all kind of gradually, we start off in another genre, but we always end up going to that historical period.
yeah.
I just love the fact that you started off in journalism and you did that first. So what made you
Yes.
switch? What was the
Yes.
moment that it
Yes.
clicked in your head that you wanted to write a historical?
Um, I think it was more opportunity, really, because I'd always wanted to write fiction, and I had done my journalistic. I'd had a long journalistic career from early 20s to, I think I must have been approaching. I'm just trying to work out my age now. Yes, I was definitely sort of early 40s, and I had actually started to write some first
Right.
person pieces. um, it was a bit of a gradual drifting, really. So it started off news investigations, and then I kind of, as I got older, I drifted more to features, which is
Yeah.
very true life stories. Interviewing people like what you've just been saying about their experiences and being their voice. So it was always about. It was very important for me to write their stories and as accurately as possible,
Yeah, of
and for
course.
them
Yeah.
to like that. of them doing pleasing, which is a really difficult thing to do. But anyway, so I went from there to then starting to write more first-person pieces, but that was perpetuated because I felt very strongly about not being able to have children, IVF, being childless by choice, being childless by circumstance, and things like the menopause, things like that. So, and my husband had head and neck cancer as well, which obviously hadn't really been written a lot about at that time. It was a particular sort of... So I sort of wrote all of this in articles, and I did try to add a bit of humour to it, especially with the IVF treatment. And I got an agent through all of that, and she said, "Oh, look, let's put out a book there on the IVF." That didn't work out, but then a true life story book got a commission, which was about a woman who had, remarkably overcome all of this hardship after being sort of a teenage prostitute. And that fell through for various reasons. And then I sort of came to this, just as that was sort of ending, one of the editors, which had seen my writing in that ebook and in the pictures that I had done for the True Life book, and she said, "Oh, I really like your sort of style and your voice. Would you like to try and write something written, in World War II that's fictionalized, it's based around sort of a group of women?" And that was that's how it came about. And it really grabbed my interest. I said, "Oh yeah, of course." So I started to have a look, and that's when I looked into Sunderland and what the women in Sunderland were doing during that period. And I started looking at the shipyards because they were such a big part of Sunderland and had been while I'd been growing up, or obviously they're no longer in existence. And that was it. My imagination was just grabbed by the fact that these women work there, and it had been such a male-dominated environment, which brings me back to something else you were saying, which is really interesting, was that I think during the war, for women, taking away all the seriousness and the awfulness of it all, for women, it opened up these doors for them to do
really
stuff.
It
liberated them. And that really, really, struck a chord in me that I wanted to sort of bring out. So, and that's how it came about, really. It was about these women who all of a sudden were given the chance to work in this place that had always been totally and utterly male-dominated, like just no women. I think there might have been one odd woman that I heard about out of all the shipyards that worked somewhere in Jarrow and Hebble or somewhere, but generally no. And all of a sudden these women, and they were also taking on that role of, you just said there, with the embroidery and meeting Mr. Right and getting married. That was just completely, it was like black and white. It was then donning overalls, boots, welding masks. So fascinating. So it just went from there, really. And just totally captured my interest as a woman and how women had changed. And that's what I kind of tried to do a little bit within the series, is to show those, how it changed those women.
It's so funny you say that, because I was one of the first outside women to decide I'm invading the wrestling industry. Not in a good way. I didn't get in the ring. It wasn't like that. I wanted to be a writer, and I wanted to write for these boys, because I believed that I could help them tell their stories, and I felt like a lot of them hit brick walls when it came to kind of getting their points across and their stories across. And I hit a very much, it is 90% male behind, in fact, it's 99% male behind that curtain. And there's only one company that I'm aware of that has somebody that writes wrestling story rights. And I went and I studied under several men who wrote wrestling. And I realized just how sexist a place it was. And I thought, oh, okay. None of the boys that were in the ring were sexist to me, which I was super relieved, and it made me love them all the more. But these men that were behind the scenes, they super were. And even to this day, I still get told that I will never be able to write for a wrestling show, for a wrestling company, because I'm a woman, right? It's a very male-dominated world. So the good thing about this podcast, and I did it in episode 2 when I sat down with my co-author, I'm kind of challenging them a little bit, but I'm doing it publicly where they can't hide away. And I'm very much publicly saying, why are we not having more females writing wrestling? Because funnily enough, some of the best writers for wrestling are female. They don't need to get in the ring. They don't need to wrestle because they watch the show with such a detailed eye. They pick out threads of wrestling that no male could pick out. I think we have that very unique DNA for females, so we see things that a lot of males don't. And I think I drove my first sort of wrestling sort of mentor was Vince Russo, and I drove him insane. Because one of the things the wrestlers had taught me was you have to be able to answer why to everything, right? So if you pick a rose for somebody, you need to say, why a rose? Why do they need to do the storyline? Why do they need to wrestle this night? Why do you need them to wear a flower shirt, right? It's like crazy little things like that. And he hated me. He absolutely 100% hated me because I'd come to him with these storylines and I'd say, one of the first pieces I wrote for him was, why they screwed up a romantic storyline and why were they making her fall in love with many different wrestlers over a period of like 2 months. I said, if you're going to do a romantic storyline, you need to build it over weeks and weeks and weeks. And it's very funny because this year WWE did that. They did build it up over a number of weeks, and then they kind of just spoiled it because they kind of had the fast forward button. And then it was like, oh, they're getting married next week, and oh, the following week, they're going to get divorced. I'm like, that's not how romance works. They don't have anybody on staff that knows how to write a good romantic drama. And if they're going to have romance in wrestling, they need to know how to do it, and they need to know how to do it right. So I kind of keep challenging them in that regard. I'm like, if you're going to come into our world, at least get somebody that could do it right. We've got $1 billion industry that's been around longer than wrestling. And there's a reason for that. We know how to do longevity, and it's not just because we've got 300, 400 pages to fill, but it's because we know how to tell a story. And not only do we know how to tell a story, we know how to tell a good romance story that sticks in the minds of our readers and gets them to come back every week or every month or whenever we have releases. So I love that. And that's part of the reason I became a writer was I found frustration almost not just within wrestling, but within writing itself. I felt like at the time when I started looking into it, females were getting very much segregated into romance. And it felt like people looked at us and goes, oh, that's a female. She should only be writing romance. Why is she writing fantasy? Or why is she writing crime? And I'm so glad to see that we're breaking down those barriers. We've got best-selling crime authors now here in the UK that are legendarily known. We've dominated the historical side, and we're doing really well with that. And we're really sort of pushing the boundaries for fantasy as well. And we're taking over the industry slowly, step by step. Because I believe, we're seeing more female editors in different genres. We're seeing agents tackling different genres and not just sidelining us to one and saying, okay, you've written this kind of genre. This is your brand. You can't write anything else. This is where you need to be. And I think agents themselves are letting us explore more and see where our voice takes us and see what stuff we come up with as writers. And it's a lot more freeing, I think, for the writers nowadays than what it's been in the past. And I think you and me are going to be the leaders of that as well, or at least I think you will be, because you'll be in the publishing realm, and I'll be the voice on the microphone going, I think we could be going into this one, girls. You know, lead the charge in a different way, almost. At least I like to think I will.
Well, yeah, no, it's great, and I think you're right. I think women do need to be, pushing their way into these
Yeah,
areas if that's where they want to be, and not letting anything stop them. You have to have a bit of a hard,
tough
you
skin.
have
Yeah,
to sort of have a bit of a tough exterior, as long as that doesn't make you too hard inside. But I think there's so many. Journalism was very like that when I first started, sort of back, 25, 30 years ago, very, very male dominated. And it's great
yeah.
that now it is so different,
Males
Yes,
club.
there's
Yeah,
still that intrinsic sort of, dominance, but, you have a lot of women that have come up. A lot of people I used to work with actually are now very sort of high up and
yeah. It
influential
is. Yeah.
within the media. And that's just brilliant to see. But like you say, they were pushing those boundaries, and it takes time. That was 20 years ago, and it's showing fruition now, which is great. So it is worth it. So any women out there wanting to do it,
I think it's
if
also
you
great
want to do
because
it, do it.
when you look at
Um,
sort of J.K. Rowling as a perfect example, when she decided to do Harry Potter, it was a very male dominated, genre that she went into. And now you're seeing, bestseller Debbie Glory
yeah,
has multiple best-selling novels in that area. We're seeing trickles of women taking over sort of these children's novel areas. And I think it just takes one of us to get in. One of us to get in and prove that we have what it takes, and then we can flip it round. And
yeah,
I like to
yeah,
think that maybe when
yeah,
I look back in 20 years from now, instead of seeing such a low number of disabled writers out there, I'll see that, the programs that I've been involved in, like the 1 in 4 Writers Coalition program and stuff like that, will have made a huge impact, and we'll see a larger number of disabled writers breaking through and really finding a home for themselves and a home for their talent, and will maybe have changed the way that people look at especially
yes,
disabled writers. Because I mean, I've been rejected, funnily enough, from some of the biggest
yes,
publishers in the world because I'm dyslexic. We're in a day and age where dyslexia is on a huge rise, and publishers are literally turning away people with
yeah.
dyslexia because, oh, well, it's going to take more editing and maybe the proofreader a bit longer to read through it. I think that's an awful excuse for editors nowadays. So I like to kind of pick up the stick and say, hey, some disabled people out there, I mean, my story a little bit, but
Yeah,
I've been through the war. I know exactly what it takes to sit and write a novel if you've got a long-term health condition, especially when it's degenerative, to sit there and write something and then work with an editor, because every one of us has to go and pay for a freelance editor to edit our work, go through all that process, and they're not cheap. So, these freelance editors are not cheap, and we go through all that, and then to get turned away because we're dyslexic, it seems wrong. It seems like we
no,
should
that's
be a much
terrible.
more,
Yeah,
as a
yeah,
society now, we should be much more open and understanding. And I think it shouldn't be about what you don't have. It should be about what you're bringing to the table. I mean, could you imagine what the world would be like if Catherine
yeah,
hadn't
definitely.
gotten
Yeah,
that chance with Random House to have her work put out there? I mean, the
yes,
Queen was one of
yes.
her biggest fans. She read every single one. She made her a dame.
Yes,
Catherine had
yes,
no education. She never finished school. And she got
yeah,
given an honorary degree.
yeah,
I can't remember
yeah,
what university it was, but they honored her with that. But to now look at
mm,
publishing has gone in a
yeah,
sort of very
yeah,
weird way where it's so much tougher to get in. It's 99% tougher to get an agent. I know, because I've had some really bad ones. The ones that are easy to get into is not the ones you
yeah,
want, because you're they're not the best.
Right. Okay. That's
I would like to
interesting.
kind of
Yes.
see journalists shining a little bit more light on that, on the fact that there is these really bad agencies out there, and that there's these publishers that are taking advantage. I think,
that's really interesting.
that would be a hell of a story. And if they actually highlighted the companies in the UK that were doing it, I think there'd be a lot of Sunday Times readers that would be going, oh, wait a minute here. Like, why is this going on? Why are these people having a tougher time of it?
Yeah.
Maybe I've inspired a story for somebody else, but...
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's
and that's
something
the thing.
That you're right,
there's so many of
highlighted.
this journalistic investigations, I think, that particularly when it comes to our world, kind of gets forgotten about because there's so many crimes on the rise again. We've got a very unstable world. We've had COVID. We still got COVID, even though our governments have let go of all the restrictions. But COVID's still a big factor in our healthcare system. It's just, to me, I think there's so much other stuff out there that, if you don't want to read about COVID or you don't want to read about the war, there is all these other stories about structures and industry that needs to change. And there's things like, well, what is the disabled movement? Are we just a minority that's getting packed in with people of color and ethnicity? Or can we actually be included in our own little genre, our own little area where we're not getting that same stigma? And it is a stigma now. Oh, you're disabled? Oh, you're a minority.
Definitely.
And then you worry if you've got a job that you've only got it because they're ticking the box. It's a case of disabled people. We don't want to be a minority. We want that open opportunity, but we don't want the stigma that's attached to it.
You just want equality.
Or starting a job where you told them everything about your health and they haven't bothered to read the report, and then you get let go 3-4 months later because they realize, oh, you can't do this, this, and this, or you have to go away every month for a day hospital stay just to get treatment. Like, I mean, I thought we were kind of beyond that days. I feel in a society we're slipping a bit.
And it's good that you keep making people aware of that, because people like myself aren't necessarily aware of that, because you hear a lot about the publishing industry, welcoming diversity and, really, really pushing that message out there that they are addressing it. So it's good that you keep, going and telling them that.
And it's diversity is such a funny word for me, because diversity is not for disabled. No, seriously. Publishers say, we're open to diversity, we're open to including everybody. Diversity is their new word for colored minorities. Right? It actually has nothing to do with including everybody or disabled people. It is very much of, this is to do with coming up with a term or a phrase to say we're looking for colored minorities. And when you go in and you say, oh, you said you were looking for diversity, well, I'm disabled, and they go, oh, but what race are you? Or what ethnicity are you? And I says, well, you're doing a diversity call. Why would that matter? And then I discover their diversity means they're looking for your ethnicity only. If you're looking for ethnicity calls, do an ethnicity call. Don't say you're doing a diversity call, because it's very, very kind of misleading for disabled people. But it's weird because there's that sort of almost like disabled people, we have our own grapevine, I think. So the word kind of goes out on the grapevine, hey, these people are saying diversity call, but it's not a diversity call, peeps. It's ethnicity. And it saddens me. It does. It really saddens me when I think, if you're going to do something, be honest about what you're doing. Don't try and use a fancy term that means more than it does.
Have you thought about writing and contacting the bookseller,
I'd
because
love to
that
do
would
it.
be a really interesting article to
I've
read
never thought of
there.
myself as someone sitting down and doing a journalistic article, simply because I look at my writing and I think, my dyslexia would so show through on that one. But it's not just that, it's like, I never know who the right people to get a story like that out to is. Like, I've never done sort of study journalism or things like that. But I'm a great person. I will say to people, here's a story, run with it. Because if I can't do it myself, then I'm big enough and ugly enough to say, okay, this is not my area. I can hand it over to somebody else and let them see where they go with it. Yeah, I
Yes,
could
but
write
you're
it.
you're a writer
As
though,
I
so
said, now
you
I got the
could write
experience, I would think.
your first person piece. And, yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, you're a writer, so you'd be able to write in any format. It's whether it be journalism or fiction, non-fiction. It's in you, so you will be able to do that. And I think sometimes it's just realizing these people are just people who sat at desks and they're no great shakes. They're just people, and if they can get something through their email from you to say, which was really interesting what you say there, look, let's call this out for what it is. This is not diversity. This is about ethnicity, and we need to be having a discussion about. And then, I think if I was the editor, I would
Especially
be
when I
really looking
find
at that
it
and
funny
wanting
when
to
we've
pick up
got
on it.
diversity people. And then I find out diversity people actually don't have any means to help people. It's like they're sitting there and their whole job is to make sure that boxes are being ticked. They're making sure that, and it's a case of they're actually looking to make sure that ethnicity boxes are being checked, not making sure everybody's being included. Because if you sit and think about it, everyone knows how big a writer's room is, right? A writer's room can be sort of 30 or more people in some cases. One person out of that writer's room could be disabled. In fact, there's actually a stigma in Hollywood and in some publishing areas where I've had agents tell me and other friends of mine, don't tell people you're disabled. If it's an invisible disability, don't tell them you have it. And when I've asked why, it's because they turn around and say, well, they're scared of how it'll be perceived. Or they're scared that you won't be dependable. And it galls me, because I'm thinking we've got these laws about making sure disabled people are not being sort of with, the same opportunities aren't being withheld, but at the same time, these laws are not very enforced. Disabled people don't have the money to do a big lawsuit. We don't have the money to go running after these companies and pinning them down and saying, hey, you're breaking the law here by ostracizing us. Because no disabled person is going to want to risk bringing attention to themselves and getting themselves in trouble, because a lot of them are supported by the government in other ways. So they're scared, and they're scared to say anything. And whereas I am like, okay, I've got an invisible disability, but I'm not going to be somebody that's going to deny what I have. Because at the end of the day, I've always been somebody that's fought for everybody else. I did it in Shetland. I fought for, equal rights for a lot of disabled people. I was never, honestly, the most popular person for that, because, I was called a rebel and a troublemaker and stuff like that. But I did it because I knew a lot of the disabled kids I was growing up with didn't have a voice. I fought for mainstream education for myself. Every step of the way through my education process, I had to fight for the right to stay in class. And I think that's scary. That if you're disabled in any way, or you're registered disabled in any way, they try to move you into these, what they call extra support need classes. or areas where you're being taken out of social circumstances that you need to learn to navigate because you've got an invisible disability or you've got a physical disability. And particularly for me in Shetland, I didn't like that. I didn't like that at all. And I thought I now look at somebody who I admired greatly because he had learning difficulties like myself, and now he's running for council in Shetland. And if he hadn't had somebody like me who said no, he deserves the same rights and same chances as everybody else, he wouldn't be where he is now. I wouldn't be where I am now. There'd be a lot of kids that wouldn't be doing the things that they're doing. And the more of us that are open and say, hey, we're disabled, you know, we're doing this, we're living our dreams, we're doing all these great things. It is possible for you to go on and do this. Don't have people say, oh, well, you're disabled, so you've got to live a limited life. You just have to learn how to balance it, how to have a well-rounded life, but understanding that your disease or your condition or your disability has to play a factor in it. It doesn't have to control your life, but it has to play a factor in it.
Yes, well, I think, as I say, you've got a message to get out there, and I do think you've got the writing, know how to do it as well.
I can rant, I can say what I want, and know that someone's not going to come along and edit half of it out, or tell me that, you know, you've been on a rant for 25 minutes. Like, it's a freedom that I can sort of know that I don't have to answer to people, and I can say, yay, you know, listen up.
But it's really interesting because if you were to replay this this show and you were to basically write what you've just said, obviously taking out the bits of it, you would have your article there because you've just said it how I could see it being written in an article. And that's what they used to always say in journalism. Try and explain something just in layman's language. And
on the page.
You know, so I'm listening to your words and weird. I can see them in an article. So it would be really interesting, I think, for you to just as an interesting is to transcribe your words that you've just been speaking there. And I bet you'll look at that.
I'd be interested to pitch booksellers and see if I even got a response. I've actually tried there before.
And Sunday Times
and
Literary
I got
section.
Ignored.
And all it needs, all art. Right. Well, keep on trying because it is hard to get these people's interest.
Where I'm going wrong. I mean,
just make sure you hit the right person.
Changed, to the point where I don't know anybody there anymore at all. So, but no, I've tried before, and I think I will keep trying, and I always will keep trying. But hopefully, you know, together, you know, as authors, if we're all continually raising each other up, and we always keep, you know, if we all together keep raising these issues, and maybe we can make a change. You know, and one day, if I could get J.K. Rowling on here, maybe I can get that, you know, that message spread just a little bit further. You know, like that's why I actually contacted her and asked her to come on, and I got a very, I got a good blow off email back to say she's very busy right now and she's not doing any media whatsoever, and I was a bit disheartened. So I was like, oh well, at least I'm classed as media. That's kind of cool. That's a step up.
Well, you know, and at least there's the politeness of a reply,
I get a lot of silence,
which is something. It's just nothing worse than just not getting a reply.
When I first ever published my novel, the only people that actually covered it was the Aberdeen Journal, because I spent half my life in Aberdeen, and with Shetland Times, because I come from Shetland. But when I actually reached out and I kind of wrote this really detailed story about my life as this struggling disabled author who's finally broke through and had a traditional deal and stuff like that, I got silence. There was crickets across all of the papers, every one of them. and it was the most awful feeling. So I've always been nervous about reaching out to any of them since then, because it was literally crickets. You could hear it, crickets, like no reply, nothing. I tried following it up, phoned in a couple of times, and no one ever got back to me. So I kind of, I only go back to the ones I know that will respond now. I think when you get burned so many times, you kind of learn, okay, maybe that's not something that they're interested in. And you, I think you don't want to really bother them too much. I know that sounds awful, but
it's very difficult. It's hard because it's very,
yeah.
it's as I say, you have to have an incredible amount of confidence in yourself for it not to drag your confidence down when you're not having a response or there's rejection. When I was a journalist, I used to pitch a lot of my feature ideas because I was freelance, and so it was very much finding the right people to pitch stuff to, and it took me a long time, obviously, to establish myself for people to actually reply.
Yeah, of course, I can imagine. Yeah,
it's very hard not to take it personally. That kind of lack of communication. But what I did do was I tried to sort of fine tune the people that I probably like what you've done, which is find people who are more on your wavelength, and then you kind of have a bit more of a two-way, communication with them and build it from there. But it's very hard. It's very hard, and sometimes if I'd have a really good story and nobody wanted it, but it was really meaningful, and it was a story I felt like should be out there.
Did you never think?
No, it was very frustrating if nobody wanted it.
Site where
very
you can
frustrating.
Just post the
and
stories that
sometimes
really mattered to you, so that people could still read them. Yeah.
No, I didn't, to be honest. Probably because I just had to earn a living, and I couldn't have in that way. But I was quite lucky in the fact that I did get to write generally about what I wanted to write, and if I saw a story that I felt like should be out there, I generally managed to get it out there. So say 80% and 20% failure. But that was probably because it was very news orientated. It was probably because, it wasn't celeb or anything. It was very individual, unique stories. So I was lucky in that way.
No.
Yeah, and just about sort of,
that is a myth that I get a lot, which you'll laugh, which is another reason I did this show, because everyone thinks if you're an author, even if you're an indie self-published author, they think we have millions. And that is not the case, people. It is not the case. So another reason for doing the show is almost to debunk all the myths about it. It's like we're not all living in mansions with servants and butlers, and we do go to Asda and Tesco, and we all stand in line, and we all grump about how long it takes, and we all go to coffee shops and libraries, and we do normal everyday things. We're not going out to fancy lunches, and we're not having our publishers take us to lunch all the time and going on secret little trips with our agents and things like that. No, 90% of the time, if we're not stuck at the computer, we're hanging out with family and friends. We have that normal social existence. Okay, none of us had that normal social existence with COVID. None of us.
Yeah.
Anybody that was high risk had it worse because we had it longer.
Yes,
I think.
that's
because
true. Yes.
Once everybody got to go back to work, all the high risk ones, we were still at home. So we had like an extra 6 to 9 months of being at home because, well, we're high risk. Like, I'm still high risk. And even when all those measures lift on the 31st, I still have to think like a high, they tell me, oh, you're still high risk. You got to take your safety measures, wear your mask in shops. And, even if you're at the hospital and everyone's walking around without masks, keep yours on. Like, they drum that into us. And actually, I keep forgetting to go for my shot, actually.
But
and I'm not just being sort of protected 3 times. I've had 5 of these boosters. And every time you get it, you lose like 2 days because you're sick as a dog for 2 days.
Right.
Everyone else is like running around happy. You know, they're having all these mild symptoms, and I'm the one in bed like, ugh. My hubby's like, are you dying today? And I'm like, yeah, pretty much. I'll just lie here.
Gosh.
I'll see you in 8 hours. Don't. You know, he's kind of gotten used to that side of me. But I was looking at 3 Cheers for the Shipyard books. And I must admit, I'm really looking forward to getting my hands on it. So do you want to tell the listeners out here? I have a terrible habit of saying readers. I don't know why. Or viewers, which is even worse because they can't view us. Do you want to tell us a little bit about the book and what inspired this storyline for you, this one in particular?
Well, this one is the final of the series, so it was very exciting to write, very scary as well, because I was pulling all of those storylines and bringing them to an end in a way. But I really, really enjoyed writing it as well, because I kind of knew what I wanted each character, what I wanted to happen with each character, and that brought me quite a lot of joy. And so that is the final book, really. So you go through the first one, it's 6 months, every 6 months, and then you're there.
So how are you feeling about ending the series?
Have
you got another idea in mind that you're going to follow, or are you kind of at this nervous bit?
Yes, definitely. Well, interesting, because when you were talking about changing genre, so I've written 12 books within the saga historical genre, and I feel like I'm very lucky that, you know, the series lasted so long, and I feel like it's been a lovely experience. But I want to write crime now, which is why it's interesting what you were saying with regards women in crime, etc., because I have so much experience within reporting crime, writing crime, and working as a journalist. I just felt like that's a genre that I
have
really
some great
like
friends in crime that I'll have to introduce you to.
Yeah, so that's what I'm doing at the moment.
One of them was actually my mentor in school that helped keep me writing, and her name is Marcy Taylor, and she's a best-selling crime author from Shetland. And hers is all set on a sailing boat. But she also has an invisible health issue. So I love her because she really is that. She's a rural town girl. She's fought through this incredible, difficult, invisible disease, which still sometimes completely knocks her out. And then on top of it, she sails boats, you know? So she really taps into things she loves, and that's what I love about her.
Wow.
And then, of course, on our show, we've just had M.W. Craven on.
Yes.
And he's quite a big name in crime. So he's got a really good way of putting, I think it's very ordinary people with sort of very, very comical twist. So I recommend keeping an eye out for his podcast coming out, his episode coming out, because he is genuinely very funny. And then we've had the very, very lovely Marie Force. And she actually did an exceedingly long crime series. So her book series itself was incredibly long. It was very interesting. She actually used Washington, D.C. as her base. And I think that one you should check out. I'm trying to think. It's the Fatal series, it's called. I think there's like, I want to say 14 or 16 books in that series. But again, she's someone that, yes, there's a lot of romance in it. So she's sort of like the romantic crime version. Then you've got Marsley, who's very much procedural UK. And then you've got Mike, who writes Poe, and they're kind of comical, very dark and deep crime. So let me know if you're wanting to meet any of them, and I will definitely set that up, because it's really good before you jump into a genre to have those kinds of conversations, because it can almost, I like to say it prepares you for when you hit the water.
Yeah.
And it makes it kind of like you can go, okay, I know what I'm getting myself into. And it
Yes.
eases the way a little bit. I didn't do that. So when I
Yeah.
wrote my
Yeah.
first crime novel, which has
Yeah.
never been published, it's never been seen yet,
Mm.
but I actually sat with the guy that was in the first 48 Hours, which is
Mm.
a crime series
Mm.
on, you can see it on Amazon Prime or Sky. And I sat with him and I came up with the series and I went through all the procedures with him.
Yes.
And he was like, you've got it. You know what you're doing. Just go and write it. And he's such a great supporter and he's a very good cheerleader of mine. I just haven't had the confidence to send it to any crime agents yet, but I will get there. I'm just working my way through the editing side of it because I want it to be as good as it can be.
Yeah, do it. Yeah.
Yeah.
And remember with agents, a lot of the time, because they're so busy and they're looking at a lot of stuff, they quite like to see just a very short summary and an extract. So sort of, whet their appetite and then have them coming back for more in a way. And then you can give, I always say to people, don't try and perfect it too much. Just try and give them a nice
it's so
extract
weird because I was scared
of a
that
really
it
strong
was,
part
I
of the
have
book or the
a very
first,
kind of
20,000 words.
image-driven mind. And I was very scared I'd gone too gory almost, that I'd gone too dark. And then I met Mike, who's W. Craven, and he went, Crystal, don't be silly. He's like, you can go dark in crime books and get away with it. Just don't go into the horror genre. So I had to just quickly check where the lines between the two were.
Yeah.
So that's more where I'm just sort of kind of going over certain bits to make sure that I'm not overstepping into the horror. Yeah.
It's very hard with genre, isn't it? I find genre really difficult because it can be very pigeonholy, and I don't know if anybody really fits into a genre. I mean, if you look at, say, something like the Shipyard Girls, it doesn't totally fit into historical saga genre because it's got other elements in there. And it's like what you said with the crime. If you've got a bit of romance in the crime, then is it crime? Is it romance? And it's really hard to put stuff in. But I think we should move forward as sort of a reading and writing, public, to just kind of forget about genre and just do what you think. So if you want to put something that maybe is a little bit horror-like in, I'm kind of all for pushing those barriers.
I think there's a sense of,
people would probably argue against
reader,
and say, no, we need
some readers don't
certain
want
parameters.
That cozy crime. So that they're looking for something darker. Or there's ones that are like, well, I want something that's romantic but has a crime backdrop. So you get like, I think the best British versions of explanations to this is like, you get Mills and Boone suspense, which is crime, but with romance. And that's, funnily enough, what Marie Force did. Was she was Carina Press, because that's the American version, and it was simply suspense. Romantic suspense was what she got. And she was able to dominate it because she kind of knew, okay, I can have my romance, but I can have my suspense. I can have those dark crime. She would just read a crime article, and that would become the backdrop of whatever it is she was writing. Whereas Mike would go and he would dive into, an idea or a concept of a murder or a story, and he would really explore that. And his is known as sort of dark crime. The crime that you would see at like Bloody Scotland, which is our crime book festival here in Scotland. Must recommend you come along to. It is a little pricey, but if you're going into crime, it's a must.
Yes.
And you kind of come up and you get to meet sort of the Anne Cleeves and the Marzi Taylors and the M.W. Craven. It's a great place to mingle. They have so much knowledge that they pass on. And it's not just a signing where you walk around and you can buy books. You get to really discover this other world, because that's the thing about genres. Like, you get the the Romance Writers Association, which is taking over Edinburgh this year. And that's for the whole romantic genres. Now, there's a lot of genres in romance, but they have that kind of way where you can go in and you can discover all these genres of romance, and you can meet well-established writers and get to grips with the genres that you want to get involved in. And that's what I always say. Sometimes it's good to not only just to have conversations, but to go to one of these conventions, see what readers are reacting to. And then that can almost help, because I hate saying this, but marketing really falls on us as the writers.
Yeah.
I don't know if you have the same experience as a lot of us, but we have to almost, when we're finished the book, we have to then put the marketing hat on and go, how do I promote this to the readers? Like, how is it I get this in front of the audiences that are buying it? So I almost have to put that hat on. And that's why I always say, if you're going to do these kind of things, go into the conventions, go into and experience these worlds, because a writer's retreat isn't going to tell you everything you need to know, but it gives you a good starting place. But yeah, really come along, feel the atmosphere of these conventions, and talk to the people that have been in it for a long time or are doing really well in it, so that you know the pitfalls to avoid, which I always think is a good one, but also to kind of have that great understanding of the passion that these people have for it, and so you can return the passion of your own writing to the readers, because the readers are what we do this for. It's not about the money, it's the readers and the people that's involved.
Yes, exactly, which was good. Yes, definitely. Earlier on when we were talking, I was going to say this: you can't go into writing and do it for the money. You just have to go into writing,
and it's
because
great,
you look
because
to write.
You look at
in your
the readers'
being
faces, and when you see that light, that smile that they get when they get their signed copy, or they go in and they get the latest copy and they're so excited. The ones that really break that totally melt me is when they buy the book and then they go and they find the nearest seat in the shop, and they curl up in a ball in the chair and they just dig in, Those are the ones that I go, oh, that's so me. And I get that kind of that melting feeling inside where you're just like, oh, that is to me why we're doing it. The stories are important, but it's the readers themselves. Because any one of them could be the next JK, or it could be the next Nancy Revell, or the next Crystal Flyman, or whoever it is. And I like to look on it in that way, and I like to hope that we're giving them an escape from maybe a less nicer life than what they're living, or just an escape from health issues. I mean, I know books got me through some of the darkest times in my life, I hope I've given you some helpful information on that.
Yes, I definitely think that is really. Yeah, you have definitely, especially as changing genre is quite sort of a big thing, and you're right. And the publishers are they do have certain things that they don't want in certain genres, and they do that for a reason, and they know their job. And you're right, it is down to marketing at the end of the day. But at the same time, I do think you're right with listening to the readers as well. Sometimes there's stuff that they don't want to read, For example, say the saga regional genre, the readers don't want to read any kind of erotica in there, and you totally get that. So yeah, it's deciding what you're comfortable with as a writer, I think, definitely. But I think at the end of the day, as a writer, you do have to write what
you almost kind of have to forget. You have to look at all the noise.
So it's.
I think I always close the doors, close the windows in my mind, and I write. I mean, I'm the only person I know that wrote a YA fantasy in HDU and ICU last year, and I was reading in ICU and HDU last year because I couldn't talk. I had my whole voice taken from me. I had a trachea in, and for me, writing and reading got me through a year of hell. I lost half my body weight. the day I was supposed to get married, I was back in surgery. My husband came at 3 o'clock in the morning, and he sat with me because I was going in at 6 a.m. And he held my hand and he walked me to the theater door and he said, "You're going to be okay, Crystal. I love you." And he walked me in. But for me, sitting, no matter how many wires I had or tubes I had, I was writing. And I was creating this other world. And I might share that. I'm not shared that manuscript with anyone. But you might be the first person I let to read it. Because it's truly... I'm character driven. Everything I write is character driven. And I've only just learned the trick after being in this industry for over 10 years not to info dump. Yes. I am terrible for info dumping, which is when you just take a whole bunch of the past and you use dialogue to stick it in there, or you just do it as a memory. That is called info dumping, apparently. And I'm terrible for that. So I've been kind of learning how to do that without doing it so obviously. And I've done... funnily enough, it was something I picked up.
How have you worked out to do it without it being obvious?
Little like 1 or 2 sentences throughout the book, and that actually builds in the past. So you're not getting like an entire paragraph that derails the storyline, but you're just getting like a little sentence here and there, and you don't actually realize it till you get to the end, and then you're like, oh, it makes sense. I get it, but you have to read it to the end, and it stops the rhythm of it getting knocked out. Yeah. So I might do that honor and let you read that, because it's just back from the editors. It's all the edits has been done on it, and I'm like, I have a couple of things to tweak if the editor's right, but I don't know if she is. So I'm kind of sitting on the fence. My little thing is I have to explain why earlier they want me to explain what a selkie is. And I'm kind of stuck on that one, because if you're British, you know what a selkie is. If you're not British, you don't. And that's kind of where I'm stuck, because I kind of did it little by little throughout the entire series that this guy's a selkie, and that he comes from a seal and was shedding his skin and stuff like that. But I'm nervous about putting in a proper explanation at the very beginning, because I'm scared that derails my entire story and will take away from it. So I might ask you for your thoughts on it, because it's nice to just get an outside opinion and go, okay, I'm probably overthinking this, but it's sometimes nice to do that with people. And I had beta readers.
Yeah, it's very hard.
But I want this to be something that I do with somebody very special to me, and I think you are very special to me in that regard. And I trust your opinion very much. So I know it's not your typical read, because it is a YA fantasy, but it might be something different. And the only other person I'll be sending it to is Celia Rees, who is a very famous YA children's author in England. So, very nervous. So it'll be interesting to see, because this book might get hidden forever.
Oh, yes, fingers crossed. Yes, it's exciting.
Yeah, and I hope it's good fun for everyone. So let's get into books. This is your and my weak spot. I bet you have a whole pile of books hidden away that you've been reading, and it's on your TBR. So the first sort of area into this we're going to ask you is, what books have you read recently that stuck with you the most?
That's interesting. I did think about this, because I have been doing a lot of reading lately.
I'm the same,
which might sound an obvious thing, but actually, when I'm writing, I can sometimes not read so much. Because I tend to watch sort of more stories on telly, more visual stories, I guess, as just to sort of. I've read some really good ones, actually. I mean, there's a woman called Fiona Barton, who is also actually an ex-journalist, and her books are very good. She's written about 4, and I think she's got a new one coming out. And I've read a couple of hers, and hers are very, very good, very well written. Really sort of, have you wanting more and more.
Okay.
I've just finished The Chalkman by C.J. Tudor, who
doesn't let you go.
That was very good as well. Another one that just sort of drags you in there and really does have you sort of rampaging through the book. Yeah. They're all things that I wouldn't. I've been trying to pick books that I wouldn't necessarily have chosen myself, funnily enough, to sort of force myself to read different genres, different books.
Now that one I have
and
heard
it's been really interesting. I've really enjoyed it.
If you enjoyed that
Claire
one, check out The Scandal of Anatomy.
9, which was
because that's also on Netflix. Do you remember Downton Abbey? The oldest daughter.
Oh yes, I have heard of that.
Yeah, she is the lead actress in The Scandal, Anatomy of Scandal, and I totally recommend it because she's amazing in Downton Abbey, but it's like she takes it to another level in Anatomy of Scandal. I don't like the other lead female actress as much, but I don't know if that's because I'm slightly biased in the regard that I'm connected to the other actress because she was in Downton. So I don't know if that's maybe what it is, but I did love her acting in it. She did such a superb job. I really recommend her.
Yes.
Oh gosh. You asked me that. I remember titles, but I never remember authors.
And who wrote that? Who wrote that?
So you do it as well. Oh thank God. I feel like
I'm the same. That's why I had to have my list ready for when you asked me this question, you see, because otherwise I would have been... gosh, yes, totally.
It's weird because, like, I'll go into a conversation, I'll be like, oh my God, have you read so-and-so? It was Sarah
I'm so there.
Vaughn. Yes. I love her new cover. She's just released it in a new cover.
Yes, I remember
actually
now.
Got the Netflix.
Yes, I do. Yeah.
One on it. It's like a Netflix picture on it, and it does. I prefer the old cover, but then I'm a bit more of I like original covers. I don't like the sort of newer ones that come out. And I'm terrible because if I like the US covers, I don't know if you do this, but if I like a US cover, I'll order the US version to the UK version because sometimes I like the US covers better than. I'm terrible. I surprised Debbie Harkness because she had all these UK covers coming through, and I walked up with this plastic bag with all her books in it, and it was the US covers, and she's like, I haven't seen these in ages. These are all US covers, and I'm like, I like these ones better, and she's like, totally derailed her entire signing because I had a lot of writers' questions for her, and unfortunately, she clicked really that I was a writer, and then somebody Googled me, or her assistant Googled me, and came up with my pen name, and then we ended up discussing one of my novels at the end of her signing in the corner. She just signed all my books, and she's like, "Can I have a chat with you, just like 5 minutes?" And we just talked about my book, and she's like, "It's so nice." She says, "I've not had a real writer." Approached me so long, and I was like, I don't really know if you can class me a real writer, but okay, I'll go with that.
That's really good. Yeah. Oh, that's excellent. Yeah. And I think sometimes, especially now, writers are very sort of reclusive and lonely, and I do think you when you talk to another writer, it's very exciting.
It's
because,
not I love it when I get a good set of readers.
Much as we love our husbands and partners and all the rest of it, it's not the same, is it?
I usually only get like an hour for a signing. I end up maybe being 2.5 hours. And usually the bookstore person standing doing this. Yeah. Looking at their watch and then looking at me. And I'm like, So, yeah. I love that idea of getting to sit down with other writers and other authors, and particularly readers. Because my poor husband, he hears about every book I read or I'm writing. He knows... one of my first ever novel, I read it to him while he was driving me on the tour.
Mm.
So he actually knew the book better than A, me, and B, better than any of the readers. And he's like, I hope I never have to hear that book again. Because he hated that book. He really did. Yeah, he's not a romance fan, so... and it's sports romance, and he hates wrestling at the best of times.
Why did he hate it?
Romance and wrestling together, and he was just like, no. So if he...
okay.
I hate it. I hate it so much.
But it's interesting to read your own words, isn't it?
And then I kind of like, I go over it and over it and over it. I'm like, oh, I want to rewrite this part, and I really want to rewrite this part, and particularly because I'm dyslexic. I don't see the mistakes till I've been away from the book for a year to 2 years, and even then I miss all of them. Well, most of them. So then, like, when it comes out and it's published, and I know I can't change it for some reason, then I see the mistakes, and I'm like, oh.
Right.
And it's always like really something small. Like I might use the wrong version to like site, for like physical site or website.
Worse, isn't it? Yeah.
So it's always those tiny little things that just, even a copy editor sometimes misses. And I'm like, But my first one was Marie's World, and it was with a traditional publisher called Austin Macaulay Publishing. That was the first time it was published. And I sold out everywhere I went. But here was the caveat. I actually had a co-author who was in Germany, and he was trying to get a visa to come with me, but they wouldn't pay the £45 for his visa. So everywhere was, and they didn't do the advertisement for where we were going. So when the fans that did follow our social medias, they did turn up. But I had those awkward moments of when I was having to apologize to the wrestling fans for Joe not being there. And I was just like, oh, this is so awkward. And and I've never gone back with them. But I wished it had gone better, because I think that book really would have taken off if they paid us in advance, but none of us was actually informed the advance was the marketing budget. So that would have been nice to have known. And also we got told that our fuel would be covered driving to all these bookstore events. And then they didn't cover it.
Yes.
So, yeah, I had a very unhappy hubby who paid for all the fuel, kept all these fuel receipts. And we had done it was every day, sometimes twice a day we were doing signings. And I worked myself to the bone. No marketing, so I'm turning up and I'm selling all these books by word of mouth. And sometimes when I was turning up to these bookstores, the books were 4 minutes after I arrived. They would show up still in the boxes. So it was always that nerve-wracking, oh, I hope these books are going to show up in time. And it was all because the press didn't actually print enough the first run. So, it was nerve-wracking. And I've learned a lot from that. So I've learned to, check that people have done the marketing for me coming and all that kind of stuff now. The next one event that I really want to do is I want to do sort of more library things to try and keep the libraries alive. And I think I would book more library events. I would like to go up and do something for the Shetland Library and the Arcadian Library and stuff, because those are ones that really don't get many guests. Yes. I think J.K. Rowling did the biggest surprise. She flew to Orkney when they were reading one of her books. And she went because they bought her cake.
Yes.
How strange is that? And then Orkney kind of held it over Shetland that they got J.K. Rowling to come to one of their book club meetings because they bought her cake. Shetland was not happy for so long. But that's the kind of fun that the northern libraries have, because it is kind of spiritually kind of based stuff. And I know your books do quite well in the Shetland Library, so it might be a nice adventure for you. And if you go up during the summer, it doesn't the sun never sets. Good. So you basically get light 24/7 from May through to September. And it is beautiful. It's absolutely stunning. And then during the winter, it is the harshest, strongest winters
Wow.
you'll ever face. And you only
Wow.
get a couple of hours of sunlight. And I grew up with that, so I kind of understand it. And I used to always be happy when I would go to Aberdeen because they get
Oh.
more sunlight, obviously. So I was always happy when in this sort of winter I'd be in Aberdeen because I'd be like, yay, there's the sun. I knew it existed. But I couldn't sleep during the summers because the sun would be up and I'd be like too hyperactive running around, and my mum would be like, chill.
Oh, no. Okay,
chill.
cope with that.
So yeah, but no, it's a great writer's experience.
Oh,
and you talk about being able to zone into writing. Having the Northern Lights is one of the most, I reckon, creative injections you'll ever get. And then if you're in a rural, if you kind of get a self-catering cottage in one of the little islands, you're completely able to just submerge yourself in what you're writing. And so I know there's a lot of writers that go up during the summer, because it's very whole, a sort of tourism place. But yeah, it's a place that I recommend you visit. And it actually has a shipyard, a still working shipyard. It's a very tiny shipyard compared to yours, but yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, and this is actually a working shipyard with welders that are still there, and they fix
now, whereas
ferries
the one
and
I
do
wrote about
emergency fixes
doesn't,
to
unfortunately.
fishing boats, and they actually build fishing boats still as well. They call it the Malakoff, which is to do with the family that owns it. But yeah, it's really a magical, and you can usually meet everybody that works in the Malakoff goes to the bar that's just along the street from it. So it's like the local pub, and you're guaranteed you walk in there and there's guys in the welding suits and there's girls there, and everybody has that kind of really open atmosphere. However, the live music is never great. I will say that because I went a few times, but it's a lot of fun, and you get that really kind of good atmosphere. And the great thing about Shetlanders is we're all storytellers, so you'll have plenty of stories to come back with. I think that's why Anne Cleese really loved it when she came up, because there were so many people willing to talk to her. She definitely had an endless supply of material. So that's just another wee tip. You never know.
Yes.
I'll be sending you away with a lot today, but you never know. It's always fun. So if you had time to just sit and just read, just read for fun, read to enjoyment, what author would you pick, or what series would you pick, and why? So did I, actually. Yeah.
Well, I think I really enjoyed Jackie Collins. I came to her really late, and so strange. And even though obviously she wrote a little while ago, I just really enjoyed that complete sort of just
Have
chill
you tried
out,
Leslie Pierce yet?
Escapism, really. So yeah, that probably would be it for me.
And The Gypsy,
now, I think
which I've just finished reading. Survivor was another one that was a really popular. I think that was a Sunday Times bestseller.
I'm actually terrible with
Bella, Remember Me, Camilla. She's a really good writer, and I think she's another one that just sucks you in. I remember reading her just before surgery, and I got so into her that I woke up immediately from surgery, and I was just like, I'm going to read her. I don't care how ill I am. I'm just wanting to find out what happens, because The Gypsy was set kind of early America. So this young girl and her brother goes out to New York, and it's their venture to the gold mines. And it's very filled with danger, very filled with tragedy, and you get a really good sense of that journey. But it's written in such a way you're so sucked in, you just can't let go. So I really like her. And the other person I always think is great, if you read her Omens series is good, is Kelly Armstrong.
Oh, well, I'll definitely try her.
She's incredible. She did now this was an incredible thing. She wrote a fantasy thriller with crime in it. So you're talking about a 3 genre jump here. and it's called Omens, and it's got crows in it. It's got this lawyer in it, and then this girl whose whole world explodes because they think her parents are serial killers. And it's about her journey through that, and how does she cope, and what does she do to survive. And then there's this whole town that ends up being involved in this whole plot as well. So it's fun. It's just a fun read if you need something to cleanse the palate and move on. But I knew she wrote fantasy novels, so the whole time I was reading the book, I'm like, is this fantasy? Is this thriller? Is this crime? I could not decide what it was. I was so confused. And then I went, because I don't read blurbs. I don't know if you do this, but I don't read blurbs. I just, if I think a book looks good, I'll pick it up and I'll read it. And I'll give it a go. And I pray that I've made the good choice. Because there's some books I picked up and I thought, what was I thinking?
Yeah.
But if it's a series and I get through the first one, I kind of say to myself, right, I've got to read them all. Because I don't like not knowing how things end. It's kind of like with your series. I bought the first one and then I'm like, right, the whole series. I'm going to read all 12 now because I read them. And it's a horrible habit. And my husband's like, Crystal, we get any more books, our house is going to be a public library. We cannot. I don't let go. I don't let them go. I honestly, if it's an author I fall in love with, I totally keep them.
So you don't.
And I honestly, he has built more bookcases than he built shelves as a shop bearer. I think he's kind of gotten tired of it for me. So he literally looks at me at Christmas time and he goes, do you have enough book space? And I normally go, no. And then he's like, oh, right, I'll buy you a bookcase. Don't know where we're putting it, but I'll buy you a bookcase, you know? So, bless him. Great. I love the fact he's a joiner because he's perfect. But he builds the best bookcases and fixes them too. So, and I do tend to break them. So, yeah. So, what author would you, if you had a chance to just sit and chat with anybody? Past, present,
custom made.
Who would it be and why? And what book would you talk about? Oh, okay, that's not what I expected.
It would probably be Gone with the Wind, to be honest, because I just find I would be really interested to talk to her about her inspiration for it, and also how she managed.
I don't think she ever thought it would be a blockbuster. I think she just wrote it for
the book. I would be really
kind
interested.
of as a sort of therapy session
just
for
to
herself.
Sort of talk to her about,
because it does hit on a lot of things I don't think people realize, and it highlights a lot of things that people don't realize. And I think to her it was a therapy session, and I don't think. Because the book only really took off after she sort of passed on, I don't think she ever really realized just the extent of what that book actually achieved. Yeah.
Oh, well, that's really interesting because I don't know too much about her, but I think I was just so enthralled by the book. And that would make me even more interested in speaking to her, having learned that.
Yeah, because let's face it, we all have a therapy session.
That's the thing with writing, isn't it? There's how much is yourself.
It's very much like having a free therapist
in a way
on tap, And I do believe in therapy for writers because there's so much of the stresses of the job that you can't really explain to outside people. So if you can find a really good therapist that you can see maybe once or twice a year, it can make your writing 100% better because you're able to kind of get rid of those insecurities that you find hold you back, and it helps you really focus in on what you're doing. It's a good tip for writers out there, and I think I've just boosted a lot of therapists out there who'll be going, ooh, thank you, Crystal. So what author would you say, past or present, who influenced you, A, to start writing, B, to start reading, and who's made you the most excited? It is a tough question. Yeah.
I mean, I always go back to one of the first books that I discovered, which was Roots, when I was very young, and I just kind of happened upon it because it was on the bookshelf at home, and I think that inspired me with regards reading, because it wasn't just the story that was brilliant, and had me totally immersed in it. It was because obviously at that time there wasn't what we've been talking about with diversity and everything. It was also talking about injustice. So I think I was really moved by that, and I could see the different achievements you could have with writing a book. You can have it on so many different levels. You can educate, you can make people aware, you can just give them a really good story, you can make them escape from their reality. So I think that was quite an important book for me. And I also read another one called, which is completely different, called Follow a Wild Dolphin, which was just all about following a dolphin and the life out in the ocean. But it was just the writing and the atmosphere. So they were primary books, and obviously Gone with the Wind.
Yeah.
They were all books which took me to, which led me to other books, that they initiated me into that love, I think, definitely. And I think with the writing side of stuff, I think I've just always wrote. So I've always wrote diaries, and I've always wrote my feelings. I saw that sort of cathartic thing when I was younger, that kind of self, therapy. But I didn't really write stories. So, and then I was into the journalistic writing, and just sort of in the back of my mind, I've always wanted to write fiction, but I didn't really see how I could do it, because I earn a living with it. So it wasn't until recently that those two things happened, where I could write fiction and I could earn a living from it, happened.
Well, I'll maybe give you this diversity story, and you can write it up for
but I really enjoy journalism, so I really enjoy that.
It gives you a little, so lets you keep your hand in the journalism side. You can definitely have it. So you can always listen to this back, and you can write it up and have some fun. So if you could, go back in time.
Yeah, definitely.
Where would you go and why?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I would as well.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Well, I suppose, you know what, I would probably go back to the shipyards during World War II, because just to see, what I got right, what I got wrong. I did speak to women who'd worked in the shipyard, so I did get a little bit of an insight to that world, which was fantastic. Yeah. But I would, which actually ties in with my next question: would you go back as a writer,
or would you want to have forgotten all your your writing skills and that kind of thing?
To kind of yeah.
Oh yeah, I haven't gotten that far in the series.
Want to go back as a writer. Oh yes, that. And one of my characters does
because I'm going to do a spotlight on all 12 of your books eventually. It's just going to take me a while. Okay, I think what I was planning to do is I do it every 3. So every time I've read 3, I'll do a very special episode where I talk about my thoughts and feelings in all 3. And then I might actually just send you the link to that, so you can hear as I progress through the series how I get on.
Yeah. Please do. Yeah. Yeah, I'd love to see
LinkedIn,
which is
everybody's.
I must admit, I'm not brilliant on Instagram. I don't really
as well.
look at
I think
that.
my
main social media
use
tends
LinkedIn.
to be Twitter, Facebook, and that's it really. Which
you're actually better than most, to be fair.
Yes, but I'm not brilliant on that either, to be honest. Yeah.
Yeah, it is.
Good. Oh, that's good.
It's so weird because I'll just get sometimes a message. And I got a message the other day, and it was on Instagram.
To interact with readers,
and we were talking. That. She did like beautiful sort of little videos of her dressed up as elves, and I said to her, "Oh my gosh, you remind me of my character Frigga." And Frigga is a Norse god. And she goes, I'm going to go read your book now. But she'd heard the podcast and she wanted to know a little bit more about me. but she didn't know that I wrote under a pen name. So like she got to learn what the pen name was, and she went away and she's reading Carla now, because she loved that fantasy kind of element.
Yeah.
So I always get messages out the blue, and I have like a mainstream Facebook page that I get messages on, and most of the time my co-author hears more feedback than I do, because he's actually on the circuit as a wrestler. So he actually interacts with the fans more than me. So he's had some interesting comments from actual wrestlers, which has kind of tickled both of our sense of humors at times. So yeah. Sometimes it's weird. Like one of them said, "Do you know you have like a huge plot hole the size of an Arctic truck right there?"
Yeah, it's
in
interesting
the
to get feedback as long as it's nice feedback.
That was a friend of both me and him, and I was just like sitting there going like, "You didn't have to point that out." I didn't notice it till he did that, and I was like, but now I'm very much aware of that. So if I'm writing anything, I think of possible holes, and I always ask my editor, "Look for the holes. Look for the holes." Yeah.
Yes, that is always the fear, isn't it? Yes, and that's why it's always good to have other people's eyes on your work.
That's why I'm
because
doing like the
you do need that feedback.
and I've done
I
sessions
really,
where I've read
really
like
appreciate
a 10 pages
feedback.
of my book, or and things like that. Done these little extra episodes that you can get, but I think you can only get them if you're actually like clicked in with Spotify, because everything goes straight onto Spotify, so you don't have to like remember, okay, Monday I've got an interview, and then Wednesday I've got a spotlight, because the spotlights aren't starting until July. So like it's really good if you're on Spotify, because it just sends it to you right away, and it gives you a little notification, hey, Crystal's released this, and like that's what I keep saying to people. If you've got one that actually notifies you when the new episodes come out, it's so much easier than having to go and physically check. Unfortunately, I've still not figured out iTunes yet, and iTunes help was no help. So I will get there with iTunes eventually. It's just going to take a little bit of time and probably a lot of growing for me before I get there. Has there ever been a book that you've picked up and you just thought to yourself, why am I reading this, or why did I start reading this? Yeah.
I mean, I wouldn't name any, but I have, started a couple and just thought, actually, no, this is not my bag.
I've had ones that
sometimes
me.
it's just
if I've not read the blurb,
it's not my thing. Not necessarily because
I don't know what I was
written.
thinking, but I picked up a Silver Day one, and I didn't realize. I like a little bit of steam in my books, but I never realized quite what I was getting myself into. And the first kind of major scene was a bondage scene, and that totally turned me off, and I had to put it down. And I love Sylvia. I think she's an incredible writer, and I say this to her all the time. She inducted me into the Romance Society in America, and I adore her completely. But the bondage thing wasn't for me. So it's the first time I was working with a woman who loved it, and I basically donated the copies of Sylvia that I had, and my 50 Shades of Grey copy that I never read, to her, and I'm like, here, little gift from me, thanks for working with me, kind of thing. And when I'm actually thinking is, thank goodness I'm getting to upload these to somebody, because it's good, because I never wanted to give them as Christmas presents, because you just never know if someone's going to be into that or not. So yeah, it was they are, it just wasn't my thing, and I kind of look on it, if I don't like a book, to me, it's just not my thing.
It is.
Like,
apparently, they're very, very popular, but I'm.
So going into your writing, this is the fun part. This is what all the young sort of inspiring writers listen for. We're going to talk about that.
But I am a bit
fascinated with your journalism, so I'm going to be wondering if your journalism is going to be tying into your fictional writing a little bit more. But how did you go about creating the darker sides, like those moments of fear and death and tragedy and things like that with your historical fiction? Yeah.
Well, I mean, again, a lot of the stuff that I covered with my
So it wasn't like
journalism,
a case of like
you're just
putting
sort of
music
speaking
on
to
to get your
people that
sort of
have
your brain into
been through
that
those dark
positions, or
times.
was it just it just
So I
flowed
drew a
straight
lot,
into you?
a
It
lot
wasn't a
from that,
process that you
definitely.
actually had to
Yeah.
create.
And obviously we've all,
Yeah.
no, it just kind of comes. But sometimes when I'm driving and I listen to some music, I can feel something and I think I must hold on to that, I must remember that, and I will go home and make a note of it.
Do
So
you never do?
I
I
do
do
find
this, and
music
it's
very sort of
terrible. But
stirring
I
and
either
really
have a
brings a
notepad
lot of
with me if I'm with
emotions
people,
that
but if
I
I'm
then
on
think,
my
actually,
own,
that
I
would be
use
really
my
good
phone
to
as a
put into
dictaphone
that
if I'm
scene.
out, and I'll say right, and I will put just like almost like what you would call bullet points, and I bullet point it into a note so that I don't
Yes, that's a
lose
really
it,
good idea.
because I'm terrible. If my brain gets distracted with something else, I'll forget it,
Yeah.
because my brain will think I've written it, and it'll just delete it,
Yeah.
which is horrible because every time I finish a book, it deletes the entire book from my mind,
Yes.
which is not helpful
Yeah.
if you're writing a series and you got to try and find how to move it forward. So for me, I have to be super careful with that. So I'm always making notes and trying to make sure it's everywhere so that if I'm trying to do something, I don't forget. I don't forget the important stuff. However, Ian, bless him, there's been many a night where I've sat up and gone, aha,
Yes.
I've got this. And he's just done like, the seatbelt thing that mums do in car accidents where they stick their arm out. He does like the seatbelt thing and he goes, sleep. And I just get shoved back down and told to go to sleep, because he can't sleep if I'm up walking about the house or writing or whatever. It disturbs him. So he just sort of seatbelts me until I go back to sleep. So I have started making notes inside of my bed because I've got a neck light so I can scribble them down.
Yeah. 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 Yeah, it's a good idea. Definitely. I'm not very good with the sort of the iPhone and doing it, but I always have just a little sort of notepad with me or beside the bed. 'Cause just like you, sometimes that's it. Your brain starts to relax, and that's when things
so funny because
can
he's
jump
so
to the fore.
used to me.
And like you,
that
they'll
we've
be
been
gone by
together
the morning.
14
So
years, but people,
I
when
just
they're around
scribble on a
us, they
piece of
think that
paper,
we've been
and
together
then
for
that
like
will trigger
50.
it off.
Because we spent, we're the only people that we actually know that can be in a room together 24/7, 365 days, and we don't fight like every other couple does. We will argue and we'll debate about things, and he'll tell me. He's very good at telling me when I get history wrong, because he's a history he really loves his history, and he really loves his World War history, and he's very much into sort of tanks and battleships and stuff. So he's really been helpful with that. But for me, I don't know all that, so I kind of sponge off him a lot. And we're total opposites, because he's this 6'2" biker from the East End of Glasgow who's had it rough and tough, and he's got that rough and tough exterior. And then I'm like barely 5'2" from Shetland, who's had this very sort of sheltered life. So we're complete opposites, but we gel so well together, and we've got the kind of romance story that people would think was a film, not a real life thing. Whereas I spoke to him online for like 2 months. My grandfather passed away. I was so sad, and I just totally didn't know who I was anymore. And he came to Shetland, and we dated in person for like a week. It wasn't long at all. And then I moved in with him, and we've never been apart since, except for when I stay in hospital, obviously. But the two of us has been together ever since, and it took us over 10 years to get engaged.
Wow.
we were a bit slower than most, but we got there in the end. So yeah, I mean, I think I blame him for a lot of the romantic sort of notions I get, stories I get. Yeah, and he's like, don't do it, don't do it. What inspired you to pick
that
the
sounds
timeline
like great material to use in your romantic writing? Yeah.
When do you what do you think you're going to write most in your career moving forward?
I think the timeline question for the Shipyard Girls was very much. I just happened to write the first one over 6 months, and then when more was commissioned, it was just like, right, okay, everyone's going to be 6 months.
Sorry,
so
maybe
so that was great.
That a little bit.
Had that framework to work in. And the second question was what was it?
Yeah, like where do you think your writing moving forward will be mostly based in? Like, where do you plan to do most of your future writing? Is it going to be present day? Are we going to see more historical? Where do you think you're going to spend most of your time? Yeah, it's a tough question, though. I must admit, I gave you a tough one.
I don't know. That's the weird thing, because I can be rather changeable with things. It is. Yeah, I mean, at the moment, I feel like I've been enmeshed in World War II period for sort of 6 years. Now I'm moving to being in sort of contemporary society, but I could see, going back into historical fiction. So I don't know. At the moment,
it's a tough question. I decided, since I knew a little bit
now, I'm very enmeshed in.
I can't give her the easy ones.
But whether that
I got to challenge her a little bit more than my usual guest. So, when you write your books, is it like a movie that you have in your head, or is it like a jigsaw puzzle that you kind of put together?
Yeah. No.
You might find crime ends up being a jigsaw puzzle, though.
Quite a movie, actually. Yeah. I tend to see it in my head and then write it.
Yeah.
I am finding that a bit more with this genre, definitely, that it's a little bit of both. So it's kind of jigsaw like and then a bit of daydreamy movie.
It has a different effect.
Then back to the jigsaw.
So like romance is very much movie, it's very linear. And then when you go into like crime, it's very jigsaw puzzled. Horror is very jigsaw puzzled. So everyone kind of has their own way of presenting themselves to writers, and I thought it would be different for every writer, but actually it's only different with the genre, which I think is quite interesting. Yeah,
it is. That is really interesting, actually. Yes, because I'd never viewed it like that.
And it's clicking it together.
It's a really good way of describing it. That's
so which character stayed with you the most?
Because you are sort of putting that jigsaw together, so by the end you have a full picture, which hopefully will satisfy the reader.
Any character that sort of just hung around and annoyed you a little bit, or just begged for attention,
from
or you always
general
think about,
or my own writing.
Oh, okay.
I think Atticus from To Kill a Mockingbird has always drifted around my head.
Into your writing and
because
I
think
like
he gave such wonderful guidance when I was younger and read it. So he's kind of always there as that.
Yeah, you'll be like, Crystal, you fixed it.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah, that's what I'll be scribbling down in my book after we've had this podcast. Is that I'll be putting Atticus question mark.
Because I find people that have read Killing a Mockingbird.
Yeah, because he's such a lovely
really helps with their crime writing, and I don't know why.
I'll have to go and reread the book. That's one book I do want to go back and reread.
That might be an interesting one. When you finish your crime novel, you can come back on and tell me if I was right and how it helped. So, what character
really
have you written that you would have liked to have written more about?
Yeah. Yes.
Yes. Which one of those would you say you would have liked to have written more about or explored more?
Oh, so say if I was to pick up the Shipyard Girls and take a character forward, say beyond. Oh gosh.
Yes.
Two characters, which I suppose were more secondary characters, so I didn't get to sort of really write them. And Kate is one who works as a seamstress and has had this incredibly sort of hard upbringing. Yeah, I would definitely like to delve into her more. And
Yeah.
Charlotte, who is the daughter to Rosie, because she's
Yeah, I
quite
like the sound
young.
of
So
that.
I
And
think that would be
it's sometimes
wonderful
I
to
find
see
it's
how her
the smaller
early upbringing,
characters
which was
that
obviously
can make
very
a really good
diverse and very
spin-off series
different,
because you don't
would
get to
affect her as
be
she went
involved with
on.
them as
Yeah.
much. So what techniques have you found the most helpful, and what ones did you wish you hadn't tried?
Yes. Yes. Yeah. Yes.
It's another toughie. Yeah.
I don't know really. I don't know. It is. I did. There was one book in particular that I did quite a lot of retro scenes in, and
Yeah.
I really enjoyed doing those because it really did. That was for a character called Pearl, and I enjoyed doing that because I wanted the reader to understand where she'd come from and that, perhaps empathise with her a little bit
Yeah.
more. So, and
Yeah.
perhaps on the same
No,
way, they
that's quite
also didn't
interesting because
work in
a
another
lot of people say it's
in one
either
of the
like
books further
pantsing, they
down the
tried
line
pantsing
that
and
I
couldn't do it,
started,
or
and I just thought
plotting and they
no,
couldn't
and
do
I took
plotting
them
and it
out. So
had to
yeah,
flow. So
that kind of
let's
is.
go into the funnest part. We're going into life, our lives, our lives, behind the scenes and things that we enjoy the most. So what's the first thing that you do when you walk away from
Yeah,
the writing and the editing at the end of the day? What do
yeah,
you go and do to just de-stress and chill out?
yeah.
Ah, okay. So what was it before? Oh,
Well, it is
yeah.
now the garden, but it never used to be. I suppose when I
I
had my
think we all
dog,
need
so
that,
it would
especially
probably
after
be go and
COVID.
see the dog and take her out for a
I
walk
was even scared to go
and
into
get
the
out into
garden
nature,
for the
which
longest
I
period
suppose
with
I kind of
COVID,
do with the garden now.
simply
It's
because
just to get
I was
out
scared that
and
somebody would come
have
over to the
nature
garden to talk
around
to
you.
me, and I would get that awkward,
Oh,
oh no
definitely, and
moment,
I'm very lucky.
So yeah, I get that, and nature can be really helpful when you're just
Yeah.
trying to find that answer to the problem. For me, it's going.
Yes.
I'll go and I'll do something arts and
Yes.
crafty, or I'll go and get Ian to
Yes.
drive me about in the car, and I'll read a book or something, and it just helps me to calm my inner voice and calm everything down.
Yes.
So, what hobbies do you enjoy, and what ones do you wish you had more time that you could explore?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
You're the second author we've had on that's a swimmer. That's interesting. Yeah.
I don't really have hobbies. The only thing I do is I go swimming, and I find.
Ah.
Oh, really? Yeah, I find water really
Yeah, it could be.
therapeutic,
That
and
could be a good one to
so
explore in the
I
future
sort
when
of
you're
combine that
needing
with the
another kind of
gardening.
outlet for your
But other
stress
than
or
that, I don't
whatever.
really have
It's a
any
good one.
hobbies really. I suppose, but the
So
gardening would be
I'm a
the hobby, I
crafter.
guess.
I
But
cross
that's kind of
stitch and I diamond paint
yeah,
because my gran
yeah,
was determined to make me a lady. She was a
yeah,
professional knitter
yeah,
by the time she was 8, and she didn't tell us any of this till
yeah.
she passed on, and then we found out about
Oh,
that. So for all of us girls, we had to know how to cook and clean and sew and
wow.
do all these sort of crafty things. So are you a crafter?
Oh, wow. Mm.
That's good, yeah. All
I'm
right.
not, but I could definitely enjoy it. I suppose I'd probably like to do art,
The
discover
best way,
art.
see
I
if
mean,
you're
my
wanting to
sister's
kind
an
of just
artist,
dip your
and
toe into
yeah, and
painting and that
she's
kind of thing.
the stuff that she does
You can
is
get
wonderful.
these
I've got it all around the
really
house, and I think
awesome
I would like to try
canvases
that
called paint by
myself.
number canvases, and they're thick actual canvases that you can stick on a cork board,
Yeah,
and you just
yeah,
match the number to the paint. but there is, and you've got all these different levels of beginner and intermediate and advanced. So you can almost build it up to the point where you can learn to draw your own sort of stuff on and paint it yourself. But it's a really good way just to, try it to see if you're a painter, or if you're going to be a cross stitcher, or if you're going to be a diamond painter. I always recommend trying that. The diamond painting is very easy, and it's a lot of fun too, and it's good for just if you want to listen to a podcast but you want your hands doing something, it's very good for that. You can just roll out your little diamond thing and you can set it all up, and then you can just listen to a podcast and do the diamond painting. So those are sort of really easy ones, I think, to do. So it's a good way to just dip your toe in and see.
Yeah.
And it's a good outlet too for writers, because sometimes if we can't write, it get kind of is a good way of clearing. I would say.
I think anything creative, like isn't it? It's all about being creative. Just lets us think things through and kind of keeps us in that creative mindset too. So I like that. So for me, I've got a long-term illness, as you know, and it makes me slow down and appreciate the day. I do not get a choice in that matter. What makes you kind of slow down and smell the roses and really enjoy what you've created in your life? Yeah. I think maybe it's a little bit like yourself. My husband has had a very serious illness with the head and neck cancer.
Exactly.
And, I think that's taught me, and still resonates with me now, to just enjoy each day, because you just don't know what's around the corner. And I think that was a very big thing. And with all of these kind of illnesses, you never know where you're at, really, do you? So
it's a really good answer. I think COVID's taught a lot of people that as well.
That really
guided us to appreciate time living in the moment, and everything that we put
just
in
really
as well.
Enjoying.
So where's your favorite place to curl up during the day? Do you like because in the UK we do not get perfect weather every day. So I know we have conservatories, which is completely alien to a lot of Americans, but it's basically a room full of windows and a really beautiful floor. It's our way of being in nature, but without freezing. So is it like a conservatory, your garden, or do you like to go to a cafe, or have you got a reader's nook area that you go to?
Yes.
Okay.
I think the sofa in our living room.
Honestly,
but that has a
it's my dream to one day have a conservatory if I stay in Britain.
Onto the garden.
I will definitely want a conservatory, but I eventually want to when I'm very old and my kids are growing up and they've gone away to live somewhere warm, that I can sit in the garden and read all day. And even if I fall asleep in the garden, I know I'm not going to get shot or murdered or something. I read too many crime novels. It's essentially my issue. So I'm always nervous about falling asleep in the garden with a novel, but I probably would do it. So now we're going on to the word game. Now this is the funnest part for the listeners, and it's the most nerve-wracking part for you and me, because it's the game where we are going to say the first thing that comes into your mind, and hopefully we can get through this so we don't totally fluster ourselves. But I gave the beautiful Nancy a very Catherine Cookson London England theme, so I'm hoping that she's going to enjoy this. So the first word is roses. Beautiful English roses. Oh, I like that. That one's good. Orchids. I like that.
Well, I was thinking War of Roses.
It's the only flower I could keep alive.
War of the Roses.
Or I did. It was the only flower I could keep alive, and then my cats have realised how to kill it.
So
I'm going to have to relearn that one, I think. So the next one is port, which I'm going to explain this to the American listeners. Port is a type of alcohol that we drink here in the UK.
Oh no.
It's a little nibble that we get, so just so that they're understanding the word that I'm giving you. It's a good mix. I'll give you that. Stilton cheese and port, they go together. I'm sorry, it's a thing. It's a thing. So the next one is Steelworks.
Stilton cheese.
Yeah, I gave you an easy one. I gave you an easy one there.
Shipyard Girls. No, actually, you did. But I'll go back on that, and I will say
right.
this. Another author called that writes within the saga genre has written about steel women who worked in steelworks.
I love all the kind
during
of
World War II,
ones.
and she's called Michelle
like
Rawlins, Rawlins. Yeah.
Oh right, okay, that's very interesting. Yeah.
Yes.
I like that a lot.
And she actually,
so
she wrote a non-fiction book on it, and then she adapted it into a fictionalized book.
Honestly, that's what I get every time I say that one. Everyone goes, "Oh, yeah." You can go with that. I'll give you all. Okay, the next one we as British people we know so well, the smell of a wet dog.
Oh, can that be an answer? Oh.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
We all know that. We all have a dog that we think of when we go, oh, wet dog.
Oh, Rosie.
Oh, wow, that's my favorite
that was my dog. Yeah. But Rosie was very, very big. She was a bull mastiff, English bull mastiff.
You should have just taken her to the groomers. It would have been easier for you. When she needs a clean, do you think on it?
It would have been worth that £25 in the bath or pop them in the shower. Yeah. So yeah, very smelly.
So the next one is
countryside. Really boggy terrain.
Because we have a lot of that in the UK, so I just felt like that was very fitting.
Oh. Yeah.
Funnily enough, when I did it, I thought of The Dwelling by Catherine Cookson.
Countryside.
And I thought of Countryside.
Probably smell, that lovely smell that you get when you're in the countryside. Because that one takes place with the girl who's living in a cave, and she ends up raising her son in a cave, and just to fight to keep her son. So that one, that one sticks with me. I don't know why. That's really...
I do want to go down there.
I probably know when you say that. I'd probably say Cotswolds because I live just on the it looks sort of just on the outskirts of the Cotswolds, and that is beautiful countryside.
I hate England. Why do you want to go there? True Scotsman at heart. So, what about London? What do you think of when you think of London?
Oh no!
I think of Buckingham Palace, and I think I do that because I've been watching The Queen on Netflix.
Big Ben, because there was something on the telly about Big Ben being fixed, and it looked fascinating.
And the last one is Brighton. That's interesting.
Yes. Yeah. Mopeds, scooters.
He would get on well with my husband, who's a motorbike.
And I only say that because my husband loves motorbikes.
Yeah, we could just stick them in a room and us
we went there for a weekend. And yes, so
I wonder how long it would take for them to realise we weren't there. That would be an interesting one to time, I think. Yeah. So that's all our questions and our conversation tips for today. It has been amazing having Nancy on, and I will keep my word and I will send her the Orchid Guild for her to have a nosy at and read. And we'll have to have you back on when you finish your crime novel and you're getting ready to publish it. It would be a deep honor, and I look forward to letting you know how the spotlights are going, because that is a goal of mine. And the great thing is I'm actually teaming up your spotlight with While I'm Writing the rest of the Shetland
Yeah.
Royal series, because it's such a big novel, but so I'm doing it in chunks.
Yes.
But I think it's going to be interesting, and
Yeah.
I think the only person I've got 2 people that's asked to see it before any publisher or editor sees it. Well, my editor will see it first, but before any publisher sees it. So I'll send you a copy of it, and
well,
I'll send
good
it
luck
to
with
Celia
that.
Reese, because I promised her too. So, and you get to
Yeah. 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 That would be lovely. We
yeah,
really enjoy
yeah,
reading that, and it's been really interesting talking to you and hearing. I feel like I've actually
you're going to
learned
be
quite a lot
scribbling
from
in your
what you've been
notepad after you come
saying,
off of this.
because sometimes you can be very reclusive when you're a
And I'll
writer.
definitely send you
And
some of
it's been
those
really
crime
interesting. And
novelists to
Jigsaw
try.
definitely stands out now, and
Particularly,
something else.
I
So,
think because
yes,
Mike does a
Atticus.
really good transition between the UK and America.
I
He's a
am.
really
You
good one to
honestly, I've
try.
got it here,
And I'll
ready.
send you over Marcy Taylor.
So
Marcy
yeah,
loves
thank you.
hearing from people. So if you've got any questions and stuff,
Thank
she's really
you.
good at guiding you through, and she can recommend some great people to talk to as well. I wish I could get Anne
Okay.
Cleves on, but so far no luck. But I'll keep
Oh,
trying.
brilliant. Yeah.
I know, right? But she doesn't
Oh,
live in
brilliant.
Shetland. She's down in England now, so it's
Yeah.
sad. But
Uh,
I will keep at it. I will keep going and see where I go.
she's
But
got to be on your show. You're in
your show will be out in
Shetland.
the end of September, so it'll be a nice summer end, I think, to the show, and it'll be a lot of fun. And I'll let you know kind of nearer the time.
Yes.
But thank you everyone for coming on.
Yes.
We are going to have the lovely Maya Way. I am so sure I just butchered that. And she will be on next week, and I cannot wait to share all of the information with you about her and the amazing stuff she's doing. But for now, I shall say goodbye for this week and see you all soon.